Hello, everyone. My name is Ann Temkin. I'm the Marie-José and Henry Kravis Chief Curator of Painting and Sculpture at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City and curator of the exhibition Judd. As you can tell, we are not at the museum right now. I'm live streaming from home, and I'm delighted to be here together with Flavin Judd, the artist's son and artistic director of the Judd Foundation, who is also streaming in from his home. Even though we can't welcome you into our galleries during this difficult time, we want to bring the museum and the art that we all care about to you at home. We're thrilled you're joining us for our third Virtual Views live Q&A. The focus this week is on an exhibition we had opened just 2 weeks before MoMA closed on March 13th. Judd is the first US retrospective in over 30 years, exploring the works and legacy of artist Donald Judd. Before we begin, I want to extend a special welcome to our vibrant community of MoMA members and donors. We especially appreciate your support at this critical time and are so glad that you're here with us tonight. An exhibition of this scale depends on a great many generous supporters. I want to share a special and heartfelt thank you to our partner Hyundai Card for making this exhibition possible. And I'd like to thank our remarkable and committed leadership supporters, the Henry Luce Foundation and Riposi. I'd also like to thank the Thomas H. Lee and Ann Tannenbaum Endowed Fund, LLWW Foundation, and the Lunder Foundation, Peter and Paula Lunder family. And we are grateful to the Joe Carroll Lauder Publications Fund of the International Council of the Museum of Modern Art for their exceptional support of our exhibition catalog. For those of you who are not members, please consider supporting MoMA by becoming a member today. You can join online at moma.org/join. We've received many questions from members over the last few days, and we also encourage all of our viewers to submit your questions to us live. You can do this in the YouTube chat feature next to the video. That will either be to the right or below the video, depending on your device, or send your question via email to membership@moma.org. Our producer will pass the questions along to me and Flavin. We want to give our viewers a few minutes to tune in and get settled, so we'll start off with a short conversation between me and Flavin. Flavin, it's a pleasure to see you from afar, as it may be.
Hi, Ann.
Welcome. Most of our questions from the audience, I think, tonight will be about the exhibition and Judd's work. But I would like to start with some personal questions, if you don't mind. And I'm going to begin with the most basic question. Tell us about your name, Flavin Judd.
Well, my parents were not terribly interested in naming their children, I don't know, after saints. So you need an alternative, and friends are a good alternative. So I'm named after Dan Flavin, obviously, and my sister is named after Yvonne Rayner.
You and your sister, Rayner, led an immense effort to renovate that building in the years after Judd's death in 1994. It's generally open to the public for visits and will be again as New York City reopens. But can you speak just a bit about the importance of the combination of living and working spaces for Don Judd?
One of the things that I think Don and my mother and most of the people in Soho were trying to do was to create something new, or to at least try. And one of the results of moving into big industrial lofts like Spring Street and the neighboring buildings was that there was no demarcation as to which were living spaces and which were workspaces. They were big, empty volumes, and you had to decide on your own what would go where. And in Don's case, that was a decision to leave the floors of Spring Street open, more or less, and to assign each one a use, and kind of work with the interrelation of the working and living so that they're integrated. I mean, the third floor is a studio. and the second floor is a living room, but the fifth floor is the bedrooms. So they're completely mixed.
Yeah. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, oh, there's a beautiful slide actually of the top of the floor with the bed and the Flavin that was made for it. Do you want to talk about that Flavin a moment?
So that piece was installed in 1970, and it was designed for the space. It's one of two pieces commissioned for the building, the other one being a fresco on the second floor by David Novros. There's a short version and a tall version, and this is the 8-foot tall version.
And so beautiful. All right, I'm going to ask you one last question before we get to our viewers' questions, Flavin. I'd love to hear about a work in the show at MoMA that you knew about, but had never actually seen in the flesh before, and what it was like to see it in real life in February.
Okay, I'll give you a close version of that. I was at the 1975 show in Ottawa,
Wow.
where the 5-unit plywood piece was installed, but I don't remember the show.
Yes.
So it was very, 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 very nice to see that piece finally, because I had seen photos of it.
You were there.
Remembered that it was there, but I didn't remember actually seeing it, and it was really nice to experience it.
Fantastic. And it was really a thrill for us to have Ottawa agree to send it here, because that was no small undertaking, to say the least. All right, let's go to our viewers' questions. Our first question comes from Claire Corey. Flavin, Claire wonders, how do you think Judd's art criticism and writing affected his work as an artist?
It to some extent allowed him to catch up with what the world was doing, because as an art critic, which he did in the late 50s, and believe it or not, he did it for money. You could actually, there was a time when you could live in New York City as an art critic. And if you read all of the art criticism he wrote then, you can see him figuring out what he thinks about art and looking at other people's work and deciding what he likes, what he doesn't like. So while it didn't have a direct effect, it did become a tool for him to see what other people were doing and who he liked and who he didn't like and why.
Yeah, for people who aren't so familiar, tell us a little bit about just how many reviews he wrote and what years that was. I find this just so astonishing.
So that's about 57 to 63, and it's about 500 reviews or something like that.
Yeah.
And they are all in the yellow writings book that was put out in 75 and is still available to the side of the writings book that we put out, which is orange. Yes,
exactly. There were many artists who, in his critiques, I think would have read a review by Don Judd of one of their shows and been quite crushed. You want to talk about that writing style a bit, which of course has been imitated, but not even nearly equaled by many in the years since?
Well, Don did not feel that it was necessary to hold back what he thought. I think he figured he was being paid, 50 cents a word or whatever it was, to write what he thought. So that's what he did. But I think that everybody understood that. And, when he said that, I don't know, Lee Bontekoe is the best artist around, that's the counterweight. I mean, when he says that, he means it. And when he says that so-and-so's paintings are not as good as what they were doing 10 years before, he means that too.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are just some beautiful, even phrases of 5 or 6 words, which are pretty unforgettable when you read them. And the pithiness, I think, is something that people is, as I said, try to imitate, and just, there's no way, it's very easy to say in 5 or 6 words something that's just gonna completely nail that show or that entire oeuvre really of a given artist. And he did it again and again. And as you say, the warmth was often there just as much as the harshness, I feel.
Yeah, they go hand in hand, but being honest always. So
Honest takes you in all directions. Ashley Edwards wonders, where did Judd source the industrial grade materials used in his work? Which of course at that time was still pretty uncommon for a fine artist.
there are a lot of the early pieces have things that he found on the street. And just as he relates in one of his essays that he helped Yayoi Kusama drag the rowboat to her studio that they found on the street. He also found a bunch of material on the street to use in his artwork. And later, when he had a little bit of money, he would go to Canal Street and buy plexiglass and aluminum and metals to be used for artwork. And that basically informed his aesthetic. And after that, it was with fabricators who, of course, sourced the material themselves.
You spoke about Kusama, that reminds me, we started talking about 101 Spring Street kind of coming into his life the same year you did. But before that, he had a loft on East 19th Street near Park Avenue South. And it's such a community that was there in that 19th Street area at that time. And that still seems to me, it feels like a little bit of an studied aspect of that period of the early 60s. Do you want to talk a little bit about a couple of his neighbors there?
Yeah, it was very much a neighborhood. I mean, Jack Wesley lived around the corner. John Chamberlain lived across the street. Yayoi Kusama lived below him. It was very much a small neighborhood. And then later, Max's Kansas City was half a block away across the street. And Don's rent was $100 a month. So it was it was a precursor to Soho, basically. Before all these people could afford their own places, they could live in this not so expensive neighborhood that I guess, Madison Avenue and Wall Street bypassed because it was no longer chic.
Yeah. Today, Gramercy Park, Flatiron, very different story. Okay, Sean Dahl, who is a MoMA member has been for 13 years, mentions that she sees this exhibition organized chronologically in such a way that it really got across Judd's use of color over time. So you might want to talk about that a little bit. And then she also wonders if Donald Judd had a favorite color.
I think he liked all colors equally. And I know that at least once I teased him by knowing that it would annoy him. I teased him by saying that gray was not a color, which of course is not true. I mean, there's a million shades of gray. So of course, then there are colors. But
and in the show, actually, there are beautiful varieties of gray.
Yeah. Fabulous shades of gray. But no, he didn't necessarily have a favorite color, but he just loved colors. And I think, for instance, the chronological ordering of the show demonstrates that in '84, when he started doing the pieces with the painted metal, you see him really exploring color in a way that he had been limited by his own rules. He had been restricting himself by his own rules, because in the earlier pieces it was one material and one color, which means you can't have two colors against each other. And so these works allowed him to really play with the colors in a way that he hadn't been able to do before. And to him, that was a great freedom. But he had to figure out a way to do it of keep breaking his own rules and keeping new rules. So that's what he did.
I think there's a sentence in something by him which said something to the effect of all colors are good. It's just such a marvelous thought. If color is a color, it's a good color.
Right.
What about the first room? We just got a peek at the last room with that work from the last decade of his life. The first gallery in the exhibition, I think, has startled people in terms of color. So many comments on the ubiquity of cadmium red light there.
Well, Don wanted a strong color that was not too dark, because if it's too dark, of course, then the shapes are rather hidden. For instance, if the piece on the right or the left had been painted in black, it would be very hard to make out their shapes. And for Don, the red was a really, really distinct, strong color, hard to avoid, that still did not hide the shapes. He also used chartreuse and yellow for the same reasons. And obviously, not all the pieces are red, but in this case, it was a way to really make the pieces as impactful as possible.
And there are several pieces in that first gallery which combine red and purple specifically.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no like theory behind the combination of red and purple. It's just that in these cases, that's what he was working with, and that's what he was interested in.
And it is incredibly beautiful to look at. I think we can say that. I don't know if he would have said that.
I think he would have agreed.
We have a live question now from Mary Coyne. Can we talk about the process of putting the exhibition together and any takeaways or new things that you both learned in the process? Well, it was a very long process. This was a slow gestating exhibition. Some are really quick and spontaneous, others are the opposite. This was definitely the latter. And this is a nice place for me to be able to say thank you to Flavin and Rainer for their patience over the course of many years. The many years that it was since we first went to them and the Judd Foundation and said, what do you think of this idea for a show at MoMA? I think one of the things that I learned in the process, which I guess I would have begun with, but increased to such a degree that there is no doubt about it, is how every piece is a surprise. Even though there may seem to be such a close connection between every stack or every progression, and that you could sort of predict what would be a blue stack with aluminum sides or a yellow progression with brass bar, you never did. Every time we took trip, and we literally took scores of trips to museums and homes all over the world, when we would get there, there was no way that the verbal description or the dimensions would prepare us for what we encountered.
Yeah, I think that's one of the signs possibly of good art, is that it makes for really bad photographs. And that's certainly true for a lot of Don's works. You can't get it in a photograph. It's just not possible. And that's why they're strong in person. Yeah.
Anything you would add about something you learned? I mean, you've been learning about Judd's work since 1968, but is there a particular thing that came across to you in the couple of weeks that the show was on view?
The 11 days?
Yeah.
No, it was just really good to see the pieces, and I think you did a really great job selecting the pieces, because it gave a good sense of the diversity of the work, which is really, really, really hard to understand if you go into, the typical museum and see one piece or maybe two pieces if you're really lucky.
Yeah.
It's really hard to understand Don's work, and for better or worse, it really takes a lot of space and a lot of works to understand the artwork. And so I think that was really great to see these kind of works.
I think with certain artists, and I don't quite know the reason, their work loves being with each other. I think in the terms of some artists, it doesn't really matter if it's in a big mixed context with the work of other artists or the work of other cultures or, you know, centuries. And that when they're in a big group all together, they don't necessarily reinforce each other. And Judd is the exact opposite. The more the colors, the shapes, the materials, the textures are playing off one another, it felt to me like each work became more talkative somehow. And this was over the course of the month, basically, that we were installing, you know, at first with a very, very few pieces, and then they would come day by day, week by week, and there'd be more there. And each individual object would end up having more to say the more the company built up. Just, I think he was always thinking as a grand whole, as much as he was thinking object by object. We have a live question from, oh, sorry.
Yes, I'm just agreeing. Yes.
Live question from Andrew Schumann. What challenges do Judd's materials present to conservators of sculpture?
And didn't you write an entire article?
I get to answer that. I think we could answer it very quickly with saying lots of challenges.
Yes, we had to invent the entire methods from scratch. So they raise a lot of questions, a lot of difficulties, and the works can't be dealt with as, for instance, an oil painting where you can fill in areas to make things work. It's a different characterization and a different way of looking at it. So yes, they present new problems and new issues.
I mean, I think the issue is that they were not necessarily materials in almost every case intended to be for fine art objects, right? So the materials aren't something like bronze that was specifically thought about as something that would last despite perhaps, you know, a bit of insult or a lot of time going by.
No, they were specifically not materials normally used for art, and were also almost always materials which others thought were unworthy of being art. So they've been harshly treated a lot of times in the past.
I think the entire conservation field actually is filled with the work of conservators undoing work of prior conservators. That's just a sad fact.
Yeah.
I have a live question from Mosley, who is a MoMA member and a 9th grader. Very happy to have this question. I would like to ask, is Judd's work really only experiential, or did he hope for any specific emotional reaction?
Not for a specific emotional reaction, but to him, there was no division between thought and emotion. So for him, it would have been going together, and the experience of the art would have been emotional already.
But there would not have been an emotion.
Specific one, no.
Right. This is not a sad piece, and that's not a happy piece.
It's up to the viewer. He adamantly refused to consider the viewer or what they might think or feel, because there were too many viewers and he couldn't do that. He could just use what he might think was interesting and go off of that and make artwork according to that criteria.
Do you, if you can think about the way your reactions to the pieces have taken place over the years, would you be able to generalize and say that if you think about a piece that you would have known 20, 30 years ago and think about it today, does your reaction change to a given piece? Or is that a constant?
It's hard to say, because I know them very well, and even the ones that I haven't seen forever, like that 5 units from Ottawa, I still know them intimately, so it doesn't really change that much. They're kind of like family members. I mean, they don't change that much. I guess I don't change that much. So
right, it can be different moods on different days, but
yeah, I see them all the time, whether I'm with them or not. So
yeah. Ellen Fleischer says, Donald Judd rejected the term minimalist to describe his work. Very true. But so what term did he accept or prefer?
He didn't feel that he had to accept any term. He just felt that he was making artwork, and that was good enough, and there was no reason to pigeonhole it. And he was against the cleaning up of history, and he was against the categorization of things and people, because he felt that that was not helpful. And in the case of the term minimalism, it was originally a derogatory label used by critics who were not that interested in the artwork and didn't necessarily understand it. So it's not a surprise that Don and most of the artists didn't use the label, because it was applied to them by others who didn't like their work.
Yeah. Like so many movements from all of art history, starting with Impressionism. Same thing. Okay, we have a question from Tootsie Warhol. He wants to know if there was any discussion about installing part of the exhibition outside, given Judd's connection to the outdoors and his great feeling for the outdoors.
You want to answer that one, Ann?
Happy to answer that one. There was discussion, and we did do it. Judd sold to MoMA in 1968 a green channel piece that was thought about specifically for the garden, the sculpture garden at that time. And in fact, there's a wonderful letter in his own handwriting in our object file where he's telling our curator at the time, Jennifer Licht, that he picked that color green specifically because he knew that that piece would be situated outdoors. So he was thinking about natural light. So that object is out there in the sculpture garden as an extension of the exhibition, looking very wonderful. We have it near a David Smith, who's an artist I think that Donald Judd had a lot of admiration for.
Yep.
We have another live member question from Alexis McCormick, who says, I'm interested in the lighting for the exhibition and how it affected the artwork. What I can tell you about the lighting is that we had to work really hard to make it look like we didn't think about the lighting at all. I think that none of us had any desire for any theatrical lighting or any sense of special effects with the lighting, and just wanted it to seem like an even, normal space to be in. And of course, easily said, not easily done, because these pieces do generate all sorts of interesting shadows, reflections, getting, in the way of the tracks that we have on the ceiling for the lights at not the most convenient moments. So it took a lot of working out, incredible painstaking care by our lighting technicians, amazing patience, amazing skill. But the idea for lighting we took from what we felt were Judd's guidelines, which was the work isn't about the lighting and the rooms aren't about the lighting. So just make it seem like something that doesn't occur to anybody as they're experiencing this show. Does that seem accurate?
Yeah.
Okay, I have a live question from the Tish family. What would Donald Judd have thought about the current quarantine moment, given his penchant for living and working in the same spaces?
I think he would have handled quarantine himself rather well, considering he was pretty happy to sit at the ranch with nobody there. And I think he would have been completely beside himself observing the response by the authorities to the pandemic. So.
Could not be truer words spoken. And I guess we'll leave it at that and move quickly on. Steve Pulmood, a MoMA member for 14 years, wonders, why is there no authorized biography of Judd yet?
I don't know how you do that. I mean, there obviously are biographies of artists, but it's really hard to find a good one, actually.
There
And
are so few.
it's a really hard thing to write, I suspect, because the results are really difficult to get right. So maybe in the future, I don't know, but so far not yet. Sorry.
That will be something that will consume a lot of your time, should it come to be. So once again, maybe not something that you're.
Maybe after we finish restoring buildings and things like this, we can focus on biography, but that's not happening yet. So
Yeah. Talk a little bit about how Donald Judd came about selecting Marfa as a location. Bill Asher is wondering this. He's heard the story that he was traveling by train through Marfa while he was in the army, but there are also other stories. He doesn't know which ones are apocryphal, which ones are true. Please explain.
So it is correct that he took a bus from Alabama to Los Angeles to get on a troop ship to go to Korea. And therefore he went through the Marfa area. But the reason we are there is because we had been going to Baja California since 1970 or 69 in Mexico for summers. And Don had intended to build something in Baja California, but that turned out to be very impractical because of the border, because of authorities. So he had to find something north of the border, and he looked in Arizona, New Mexico, and found this very small corner of Texas that has the mountains that he liked. And he chose Marfa, the Marfa area, for its landscape, and he chose Marfa, the town, because of the way the town looked, and it had a school and basic things like that you need to live.
I had a lovely conversation with artist Ronnie Horn last month. She, of course, was a good friend of Judds. And she used a phrase that I just thought was so beautiful. She said, somehow the desert in Marfa is so incredibly, and I don't think her word was empty, but that there's almost like such space to see because there's so little already there to see. And that somehow this is a place that makes seeing possible like no other. And I wonder if you would agree with that.
Yeah, Don complained that trees got in the way of the landscape. And, so both Baja and Marfa were perfect in that sense.
Yeah, yeah. I have a live question from Evangelos Katsioris. Flavin, how did Judd see his furniture design in relation to the objects? And how was it to grow up using that furniture, using those desks and beds and tables?
Well, my sister and I were the first users of the furniture because it was designed for us, because first Don couldn't find a decent looking bed, and then he couldn't find a decent looking desk, and then he couldn't find a decent looking chair. So that's where the furniture came from. And then only later, I would say 8 years later, did it become commercially available. And it was perfectly fine as everyday furniture, and that's what we used it for. Before that, we had Thone chairs, and we still have some of those. But after the furniture was made for our respective rooms, then it was made for the dining table and the studios and every other place.
And tell us, is that why you have really great posture?
I have no idea. Can't comment.
You had something great to say about the reading room that we have at the outside of the exhibition. That's the slide that was just on the screen. All of the furniture is very rectilinear, as the sculptures are. However, it is not meant to be perfect in terms of its arrangement, you told us. And you and your sister did a good job of just moving a few of the chairs around and making a little bit of a more crooked relationship between the chairs and the tables, and talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, this was also related by one of Don's employees who noticed the same thing. And Don, if people cleaned up the spaces and aligned all the chairs and smushed them under the tables exactly lined up, Don would tweak them a little, so they were a little off. And I think, Don was interested in space and light and the way things looked, but he wasn't after some kind of purity. That's just really was not a term in his vocabulary. And he wanted things to be natural. So there's this kind of dissonance required in almost everything, so that it's not artificial.
I think purity and maybe perfection would be another word, are just really serious misperceptions, right? In terms of.
Yeah, they're up there with minimalism.
Right up there with minimalism. Yeah. I have a question from Lauren DiGiulio, who says, I'm curious to hear about what it means for both MoMA and the Judd Foundation to bring the conversation around Judd's work back to New York from Marfa after he left in the 60s. So here we are back in New York, kind of full circle from Marfa. And she says, thank you, from Marfa.
Well, obviously we've retained our building at 101 Spring Street, and it's there. So we never left, but obviously, yes, the art did. But I think it's good to do a show like the MoMA show, which again shows you the breadth of the work, because the only place to normally see that is Marfa.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important and a really good thing.
Barbara Pine, who's a longtime MoMA member, says that she's curious about the Donald Judd collection of furniture in terms of the museum in Marfa showing his collection. That means, I think, the Judd Foundation buildings and the Chinati buildings. Are those works of furniture ones that he made, that you grew up with, or are those new?
They are, anything in the Judd Foundation is furniture that he had used. We didn't put any furniture except in the office. And then of course there's his collection of furniture by other people, which is in the Judd Foundation and Marfa as well, but that's something else. But in all cases, the furniture that you see when you go to Judd Foundation and Marfa is the furniture he left there. Yeah. We didn't add any.
We had another question actually about Judd as a collector. That's a subject still waiting a lot of study, I think. And that's certainly an aspect of his work that I think, or of his activity, that sheds some interesting light on how much more complicated a figure he is than people might think. Because when you go to Marfa and you go to the house, you see these collections of things like Navajo blankets and silver and turquoise jewelry and so many other things. This points to a taste that is absolutely not anything that could be mistaken for so-called minimalist taste.
No, he had maximalist taste. There's nothing minimal about it at all. You're talking about somebody who, I don't know, we have the biggest collection of Icelandic sagas for probably 2,000 miles. And we have the biggest collection of Spanish spots for probably 5,000 miles. And Don just was attracted to the way things looked. And so that's why in Judd Foundation, there is a lot of stuff. And I have to say, a lot of it looks really, really, really good, from the Navajo rugs to the Peruvian pottery to everything else.
Yeah. But it was never about getting 1 or 2 or 3 or 10.
It was just about stuff he liked.
One of the great stories that we know from Jamie Deering, an assistant to Judd, is the story of the cacti that he collected in New York long before he even thought about Marfa. And that he actually, when he moved to Marfa, brought his New York cacti with him down to Texas. That is just an image that I love.
Yeah, they rented a U-Haul, and Jamie and Mike Howard, the employee I was talking about before, loaded up the U-Haul with cactus and art, and me, Don, and Jamie drove it down to Marfa. And I remember the first time I remember the first time driving into Marfa, and we were entering from Alpine from the east. And Don had said, "Oh, this is where we're stopping, because we've been driving for 4 days or 3 days or something." And I was like going out of my mind, like, when are we going to stop? And Don said, "I rented a house in this town." So I kept pointing to houses saying, "That one, that one, that one." And he was like, "No, no, no, no." Anyway, yes, we unloaded the truck with the art and the cactus, and that was the beginning of Marfa.
Wow. Beautiful. We have a live question from Henrique Simid. Was Judd concerned with mathematical perfection? And I think you'd argue with that word, but let's say with mathematics, anywhere in the smaller tasks of everyday life? Or was that care for math reserved only for his work?
He felt that math was incredibly beautiful and also, as essentially the language of the universe, really important. But that doesn't mean that, I don't know, the glass full of milk had to be exactly halfway. No. His respect for mathematics was the same as his respect for nature or the universe, because it is what's there, and that makes it beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a live question from Livia Schneider, who wonders, what is the constant in Judd's work across his career and what changes? Well, that could be a whole other 45 minutes.
The constant is his attempt to deal with the here and now and the lived experience. And what changes is the relaxing of his own rules for his art and how to deal with that.
Wow. Okay, you had that answer. I'm going to ask you a final question. This is probably one for me. Many people want to know about the future of the exhibition. Just to name a few, MoMA members Chris Jeffrey, Teresa Carvelis-Sen, John Dayton, and others have all sent in questions something along the lines of, is there any chance that people will still be able to see this show in person? And so I would like to say that there is a chance. We are hoping that our lenders will all agree to extending the loans. We will be asking them for their permission to do so over the weeks to come. We're optimistic that given the circumstances of this moment, there will be agreement. And in that case, the museum will reopen whenever it does reopen. And the Judd show will still be there for everyone to visit. Okay, I just got the message from our producer that it's time to start wrapping up. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. Stay up to date with the museum on MoMA magazine on MoMA.org. And please visit our virtual views page there, where we have an array of features about the Judd exhibition and Judd's impact on the art of the last half century. I'd especially like to thank Sean, Howie, Travis, Natasha, Prue, Hannah, Tamar, and Quinn for their wonderful work on all of this. I want to thank you, Flavin, for being such a great conversationalist tonight and such a ready and willing answer of everyone's questions. And I want to thank everyone again for tuning in. Stay home, be well, and enjoy more virtual views from the Museum of Modern Art over the weeks ahead. Thank you. Have a good night.